Hi, Steve here with Steve Taylor Coaching. I'm a self-sabotage and recovery coach, and I'm also a licensed clinical therapist. And I work with trauma and addiction, and I want to share with you this modality called accelerated resolution therapy that I thought was too good to be true, right? So I am working in addiction treatment centers at the time, and I'm unable to really help people with post-traumatic stress. So we could get them sober, we could detox them, teach them the fundamentals of addiction and kind of process some deep things. But if somebody had like some legitimate trauma symptoms, right? Because remember, trauma is not the event that happened. That's what the traumatic experience was. Trauma is what is current. Trauma are the sensations, the flashbacks, the beliefs that we have about ourselves, but it's energy that lives in the body, it's emotions that are stuck, it's the images that we play on a loop, it's the thought patterns that we can't change. So trauma is current. So we would take away the self-medication, right? The drugs and alcohol, we'd separate them from the drugs and alcohol, and then the trauma would just bubble up. And so I could help people feel safe in my office, ground them, get them back to the present moment, but then they can't sleep at night. Or they're in group, but they can't be present in group because they're obsessing about their trauma. Or they are, they share in group, and it just re-traumatizes them. It just brings it back to where they're reenacting it. And I just ran into my limitations. You try to teach somebody meditation, but as soon as they start to sit, their mind is on a loop replaying trauma and they don't feel safe in their body, it's pretty hard to meditate. And so I ran into my limitations, and I saw on social media a colleague that I went to graduate school with post about this training that he was involved with, this modality called accelerated resolution therapy. Shout out to Wade Lang. He's got a great YouTube channel. He's doing great work helping veterans and teaching clinicians how to practice accelerated resolution therapy. So shout out to Wade. So I see him post about it. I'm like, okay, this is too good to be true. You can't really heal post-traumatic stress. Your best hope is to just kind of function with it or medicate it, or that's something that you're always going to suffer from. You just learn how to cope with it. And so that was kind of really what I was believing. But deep down, I also believed in deeper healing. And so I go to the training, and like any good training, it's experiential. So you get some information, they teach you, about, what's going on in the brain with trauma and about how the modality is effective. And Wade has some great presentations on that. AcceleratedResolutionTherapy.com is a great resource. I'm not going to get too technical in this video, but you go through the practicum, so you bring something real, and then they take you through the process from the perspective as a client. So I'll tell you what I brought that was real to it. So when I was a little boy, I was practicing a magic trick for show and tell. And so I'm doing it with my mom, I'm practicing, and I turn my back to get the trick ready, and I turn back around, and my mom is having a grand mal seizure on the floor. She's foaming at the mouth, right? So I run and I dial 911, and the ambulance comes, and, thankful that my mom survived, that it actually alerted us to a brain tumor that she had. Shout out to Mom. She's a survivor, cancer numerous times, love her to death. She's doing very well today. But needless to say, that was a traumatic experience, and I carried some of that trauma with me and anxiety into my life as an adult. So when I would think and tell that story before I did accelerated resolution therapy, what would happen is that I would get vivid images of that experience in my mind, vivid image of my mom foaming at the mouth. My heart rate would start to increase. Right? I would get a feeling, a pit in my stomach, and my hands would get very sweaty. when I would recall that scene, okay? So in accelerated resolution therapy, in this way of practicing it, you choose a scene, okay? And so that was my scene that I just described. And so the practitioner is having me visualize the scene in my mind. I don't have to say it out loud verbally. I visualize the scene in my mind, and the practitioner is moving her hand in front of my face, producing bilateral stimulation. My eyes are going back and forth, which helps our brain process information, right? It happens when we're in REM sleep. It happens while we dream. Our brain processes information. I won't get too technical, but just know that I'm visualizing the scene. And when I visualize the scene in my mind's eye, those images create the sensations in the body. They bring up the sensations in the body, the emotions, the energy emotions that are connected to those images. So we watch the scene in my mind, and then it brings up all this anxiety that's living in the body that's connected to the trauma. Then we use the eye movements to process out those sensations. And you can literally feel, the sensations and the emotions kind of calm and move their way out. It's really phenomenal. And it makes sense, like when you see an animal out in the wild, like a deer or something like that, right? Say a deer runs out into the middle of the road, and you slam on the brakes and you almost hit it, right? And it kind of freezes, and then you slam on the brakes, you don't hit it, and then it kind of just like, it shakes it off, it wakes back up, and then it prances off and goes on its way. And the deer and animals in the wild, and us as humans, when we properly process trauma, we're able to shake it off, so that deer isn't going back and re-experiencing that trauma, and now it's afraid of cars, and every time it sees a car, it freezes and has that same traumatic reaction. And that's what happens to us when we are able to normally process the traumatic experience. But sometimes we don't process it, or it's too overwhelming and it gets stuck in the body. So that's where those stuck emotions come in. So I see the scene, and then we go and then we process out the sensations. Then we go back, we see the scene again, process out the emotions. And by this time, the scene loses its emotional charge because we've got the sensations and the emotions out. The scene even starts to change on its own a lot of times, which is really cool. So after we see it a couple of times and desensitize to it, then this is a really cool part. Then we consciously get to re-script the scene. So anything's possible, just like a dream, and I got to change that traumatic scene. So I visualize a new scene that's positive, it's not distressing, it can be realistic, it doesn't have to be realistic. But what I chose to replace that scene with was a happy scene of us being at our old house in San Diego, being in the backyard, swimming. My mom is smiling, she's her vibrant, healthy, younger self. And that's the scene that I see. We use the bilateral stimulation, and that scene replaces the old one. And that's based on this well-researched phenomenon that happens around memory called memory reconsolidation. So we typically think that every time we conjure up a memory, that we're getting like a fixed static memory. We think that it's like we're pulling out the memory from the filing cabinet and it's already set, and we're just accessing that memory and we see it and then we put it back. But what's really happening when we create, we're actually recreating the memory every time we see it. So there's new proteins that are getting generated in the brain, and what's really happening is we pull out maybe some bullet points, and then as we're seeing it, we're like filling in the blanks and actually recreating the memory every time we access it. So with this memory reconsolidation is when we pull out that memory out of the filing cabinet and there's that emotional charge to it, it's actually malleable, meaning that we can change it and reprocess it and then put a positive memory back into that filing cabinet so that when we access it, we've got the new images, the new positive bullet points instead of the distressing old ones. So it's really cool. I know it might sound too good to be true, but I'm telling you, it's what I experienced. So now when I tell you the story, that scene that happened with my mom, I know all the facts. I know that she had the seizure. I know that I was extremely overwhelmed at the time, but my hands don't sweat. I don't see those same images. I see us playing in the backyard, swimming, smiling, having fun. My chest, my heart isn't beating out of my chest, and I don't have the pit in my stomach because I replaced that scene with the old scene. So ART is really cool. It's based on the mind-body connection, which we know very well, right? We get to access those deeper images and emotions that are in the more subconscious part of the brain and the physiological sensations that are associated with trauma. We get to use visualizations. We get to use Gestalt therapy. We get to use in vivo exposure. It's like a great combination of all these different modalities. And the other part that's really cool is that you don't have to verbally describe the scene. So like men who have maybe been molested or had some sort of sexual trauma that they really feel ashamed about as men talking about, or ashamed that it's still affecting them. You know, I'm a man, that shouldn't affect me, or that shouldn't have happened to me in the first place. You don't have to verbally describe it. Or if you're you know, just uncomfortable describing it. Sometimes women are uncomfortable discussing their sexual trauma with a male therapist, which is totally understandable, right? You can go through the process and you don't have to verbally describe it. Or if you're, you know, you've got some sort of, for your profession or military or top secret, whatever, of confidentiality expectations, you don't have to share it verbally. It's very cool. It's all done internally in the mind and in the body. It's easier on the therapist because we don't have to get overwhelmed with hearing the stories over and over again and absorbing everybody's trauma. It's very, very powerful. And the other cool part of it is that it's not exclusive to severe trauma, right? It works really well for that, and it's a fantastic tool for that. But you can also use the metaphors and the new scenes to give, you know, insight and to move you if you're feeling stuck or having difficulty making a decision, or, you know, things like that. Daily anxiety or self-doubt mindset issues. There's a whole host of applications for this therapy. And so I just wanted to describe it to you guys a little bit. Hopefully it resonates. I'll link to in the description to some other helpful videos if you're more interested in the technical side of things, you know, what's going on in the brain, in the amygdala, in the limbic system, in the prefrontal cortex, how that all ties together. Maybe if you're a clinician or just more scientifically oriented and you want to go down that rabbit hole, I'll provide some information for that. And if you're interested in getting, you know, some ART for yourself, you know, reach out to me. Do a Google search. Again, I'll link to some helpful resources for it. I just really believe in it. It's a powerful tool to have in your toolbox as a therapist. But also, you know, if you've just tried talk therapy and it hasn't worked for you, or you've tried medications and they haven't really worked for you, you know, give ART a try. And as somebody who's experienced it, you know, personally and professionally, you know, it's just a really awesome tool. So if you found value in this video, please share it with somebody else, share it with a friend, like it, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.